In the world of thoroughbred racing, where bloodstock agents spend more on a single yearling's veterinary evaluation than most families earn in a year, a horse purchased for $95 was supposed to vanish. That is not sentiment. That is not dramatic framing. That is the economic logic of an industry built on pedigree, confirmation, and the careful arithmetic of bloodlines stretching back centuries. The ledger was supposed to be simple: $95 in, a few races, nothing remarkable, then silence. The ledger tells a different story. What happened instead rewrote the understanding of what a racehorse could be built from, and exposed a fatal arrogance at the heart of an industry that had confused cost with capability for generations. The horse arrived at a Pennsylvania slaughter facility sometime in the early 1980s. He was not young, he was not pretty, he had the kind of conformation that makes experienced horsemen wince and look away. A ewe-neck that sat wrong on his shoulders, a back that ran slightly long, hind quarters that lacked the coiled, compressed power that evaluators spend years training their eyes to find. His hooves showed the neglect of an animal that had passed through too many hands and not enough care. The veterinarians who glanced at him on the kill floor saw a horse that had already concluded its useful life. The slaughter price that year averaged somewhere between $80 and $120 per animal. He fell at the lower end. His name was recorded in his papers, though what matters is not the name but what he represented, the absolute bottom of the market. The industry's discard pile, a creature the system had processed, evaluated, and sentenced. Every credentialed eye said the same thing, every expert voice agreed. They were all watching the same horse. Not one of them was seeing what a Pennsylvania horse and named John Haynes saw when he pulled over, looked through the fence, and paid $95 he probably shouldn't have spent. What Haynes noticed first was not the conformation, it was not the bloodlines, which were undistinguished, it was the way the horse moved even while standing, a quality that horsemen sometimes call presence and that defies precise measurement. There is something in the carriage of certain horses, a kind of compressed electricity in the way they hold weight across their hooves, that experienced eyes recognize without being able to fully articulate. The evaluators at the slaughter facility had not seen it. Haynes did. He paid the $95 and loaded the horse into a trailer that was older than the horse himself. The first workout told him he had not imagined it. The horse covered a 5-furlong training gallop in a time that didn't correspond to the body beneath him. Average workout horses at that level of conditioning typically clock training gallops in times that reflect their physical limitations. The gait of the stride, the depth of the chest, the degree of cardiovascular development all produce predictable outputs. This horse produced a time that belonged to a different animal. Haynes clocked it twice. The second reading matched the first. He stood at the rail for a long moment, doing the arithmetic of impossibility. The first races were modest, claiming races at small tracks, fields populated by horses running at the edges of their ability. And here is where the story shifts from interesting to extraordinary. The horse did not merely win. He won in a manner that defied the tactical vocabulary of small track racing. While rivals ran to their limits and held those limits, this horse accelerated through the stretch as if the previous 5 furlongs had been an extended warm-up rather than a race. The gap at the wire wasn't the product of pace collapse by competitors. The gap was the product of genuine, measured, documented acceleration in a horse that had cost less than a used bicycle. He should have leveled off. Yet the margins kept growing. Race 3, Race 5, Race 9. The pattern established itself with the mechanical certainty of a repeating equation. Different tracks, different surface conditions, different fields. The output remained consistent. Clockers began writing his name in their notebooks. Conditions horsemen, the pragmatic artisans of the small track circuit, started watching his entries with the kind of interest usually reserved for horses whose purchase prices ended in more zeros. The track surface at some of these venues was unforgiving. Hard-packed, variably maintained, the kind of going that punishes horses with inadequate foot structure and insufficient cushion in their lower limbs. Horses with his conformation were not supposed to hold up through this calendar. The ewe-neck, the slight structural irregularities, the history of neglect, every variable pointed toward breakdown or erosion. Instead, he ran through these conditions as if the physics that governed equine structural failure had simply declined to apply. While rivals fall to the track, he absorbed it, converted it, and came out of each effort looking structurally intact. He should have broken down, yet the entries kept coming. It was a veterinarian named Dr. Carol Sheridan, called in for a routine examination after an impressive Maiden of the Year series, who finally found the answer, though answer may be too clean a word for what she encountered. When she completed the cardiovascular evaluation and cross-referenced it with the pulmonary capacity measurements, her hand stopped moving across the chart. The average racehorse maintains a resting heart rate that reflects a specific ratio of cardiac mass to body weight, a ratio that holds remarkably consistent across thoroughbred populations. This horse's ratio was wrong, not marginally wrong, categorically wrong. His heart, by Sheridan's calculation, was operating with roughly 30% more mass than the breed average. For reference, Secretariat, the horse whose name became synonymous with impossible biology, possessed a cardiac advantage that researchers estimated at approximately 65% above normal. A horse purchased for $95, pulled from a kill pen, carrying structural faults that should have ended his career before it began, possessed cardiac architecture that belonged in an entirely different category of animal. The mitochondrial density in his muscle tissue, examined in subsequent biopsies, told a parallel story. Cells that had never been conditioned through elite training nevertheless showed the oxygen processing efficiency of horses that had spent seasons in world-class programs. The machine had been built right. The circumstances of his early life had simply never revealed it. The bloodstock agents laughed. Then they went quiet. Industry professionals who had walked past him in that Pennsylvania facility, or who had seen his name in entries and dismissed it without a second thought, now found themselves attempting a recalculation they had not expected to make. The calculus of $95 against what the horse had now earned was not a number any of them were eager to discuss publicly. His claiming price had risen by a factor that made the original purchase price feel like a clerical error. He raced for 4 seasons. His final earnings, accumulated from claiming races and conditions events across a circuit that had once been the ceiling of his ambition and became his foundation, reached a figure that stood as a quiet, mathematical indictment of every credential that had ever looked through that fence and seen only slaughter value. He never won a graded stakes race. He never appeared on a national broadcast. He was never celebrated in the way that the industry reserves for horses whose stories begin with expensive purchases and famous trainers. What he was, instead, was proof. Clinical, documented, measurable proof that the systems humans build to evaluate potential, the bloodline databases, the confirmation scoring, the VLT, veterinary checklists, are extraordinarily good at identifying what they already understand. They are considerably less equipped to recognize what they have never thought to look for. The vindication was quiet. It usually is, in racing. Nobody holds a press conference to announce they were wrong about a horse. Nobody publishes a correction in the trade journals explaining how a $95 kill pen purchase had exposed a systematic failure in the industry's evaluation methodology. The horse kept running. The people who had been wrong kept talking, mostly about other horses. But the data remained. The times are in the record books. The cardiac measurements are in Sheridan's files, shared now with equine researchers who cite them in studies on cardiac inheritance and performance prediction. The earnings are verified. Every variable that should have predicted failure, predicted correctly, except that the horse never received the prediction. Perhaps that is the most unsettling part of this story. Not the biology, which science has now partially explained. Not the earnings, which arithmetic can fully account for. But the question that sits beneath all of it, unresolved: how many others were there? How many animals passed through that same facility, through similar facilities, across decades of this industry's history, carrying cardiac structures and mitochondrial profiles that the system never thought to look for because the purchase price told them not to bother? The data from his career is stored in databases now. The measurements are verified. The genetics have been studied by researchers who use his case as a reference point for inherited cardiac advantage in non-elite bloodlines. Yet something about what he did remains unmeasured. $95 bought a biological truth the industry had not known it was missing. What it cannot buy, what no amount of retrospective analysis can fully reconstruct, is the exact weight of what we discard when we let a price tag do the work of an open eye. That question does not appear in any database. It has no verified answer. It may be the most important question thoroughbred racing has ever refused to ask.